Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Paul McCarthy. I'm the Project Controls Manager working up on a TMS tram project in Manchester at the moment. I'm also a guild member with the Planning Planet team. I started my career early as a process plant design engineer, working for John Brown Engineering, designing bits of oil rigs. Unfortunately, then in the mid-80s, the oil price bombed and they didn't need any oil rigs. So I found myself moving into project services. I've been associated with Planning Planet ever since the formative years, the early 90s. And I've been asked along today to give a light-hearted presentation. No PowerPoint, apart from my name. I do have a few props as well. The presentation falls naturally into two halves. The first topic was the evolution of the planner and planning. And secondly, a debate or question session at the end over the question of permanent versus contract employment for planners and project controls. I'd appreciate if you could save any questions. Hopefully we've got time for one or two questions in the middle, in the first half, the evolution of the planner, and then we'll see how much time we've got at the end, see if we can catch any more at the end. So today's first subject, the evolution of the planner. Hopefully for some of the more mature members of the audience, it will rekindle some happy memories from our pasts. And hopefully for some of the youngsters, it will give you an insight into the way it used to be. There was a suggestion, I don't know if he's over there at the moment, from Theo. I'll go to my first prompt. With the talk in a bar, obviously, of the evolution of Planning Planet and planners, Theo suggested the whole presentation was done with this on, which we didn't actually go for in the end, but I brought it along just in case. We're going to try and get him to model it later on. So the evolution of the planner. I don't intend to go back to the early origins of planning. Apparently there was a guy called Henry Gantt in 1910 who built some chart. We've also got the critical path method from DuPont and Remington, and PERT, the Navy and Lockheed Corporation gain credit for that. So I'm going to start with my time in the oil and gas industry, which was in the mid-80s. At that time, project services fell into three disciplines. There was estimating, there was cost control, and lastly, there was planning. Planning was very much the least respected of those three disciplines in those days. It was carried out manually. We had AO sheets of acetate paper, which a draftsman drew up for you with little boxes in, with enough little space for an ID, a description, and a date, and the forward and backward pass. When you were filling these sheets in, you were taught to write along a ruler with a very sharp pencil, so everyone could read them when they were finally produced. You had to manually draw on the logic links and write next to them what sort of logic link they were and if they had a duration on the constraint. The forward and backward pass was then calculated manually. Normally two guys sat next to each other, reading out, reading back, checking things as you went through. And the final results were taken down to the print room and photocopied AO sheets onto AO sheets of paper and then distributed around the team. A very cumbersome and laborious process. The creation of progress curves for the project was even more fun. We used to have things called electroline tapes, thin tape on a roll, a bit like sellotape, but a lot narrower. These came in various combinations of dots and dashes, but they were all in black, no fancy colours. What you used to do each month was cut a piece of those off with a scalpel and stick them on last month's report, and that formed the basis of the next month's progress curves. Within the team, most of the estimators, who were probably the most senior people in the team, they seemed to be ex-lead engineers. They were the experienced guys who'd gone through the business and they were then brought into the estimating function. The cost guys tended to come up from a finance or accounts background, and the planners came from all sorts of weird disciplines and sort of drifted into planning. There was no career structure or path whatsoever. You'd sometimes get grabbed in the corridor and say, hey, do you want to do planning? And that was it, you started doing planning. The planners tended to be sort of bundled together with the draftsmen. Most of the draftsmen were contractors, had their own limited companies, so most of the planners started doing the same thing, especially in the oil and gas industry. There was definitely no formal career path, and there was a very I've called it an eclectic mix of individuals. They were good fun to be around the planners. At this time, though, it was definitely not seen as a particularly skilled discipline to be working in. It was a sort of also-ran subject within the project teams. Things then moved on with the advent of computer power and some very basic planning software. Activity and logic information were typed into 2 separate databases on a mainframe computer. We happened to use a Sperry Univac, a big data bureau, to process ours. And the fruits of your efforts during the day were run on a batch run overnight. They took 7 or 8 hours to actually run a model of the network. The next morning, the first task was to go over to the bureau and collect your bundle of paper, which was the loop error report. The paper itself, normally about that thick, it was green and white fan-fold paper, lovely stuff. Then you took that back to your desk, grabbed a coffee, made with a kettle, no Starbucks, settle down, normally with a colleague, and work your way through the loop report. The goal was to then fix all the loops, any corrections, any errors, and hopefully you'd get a clear run the following evening and you'd have a successful run of your network. During this time, a bit of a battle took place between 2 planning techniques. There was precedence planning and arrow planning. There's a few nodding heads of arrow planning, but there's a few looking at me a bit blank. The eventual winner was precedence planning, the technique we use now. It was a bit like Betamax and VHS, but that will probably have some blank looks as well, or CDs and iPods. Precedence won in the end. You do still get the odd person who, for presentation purposes, might want an arrow network drawing up. They tended to be really, really high level, 8 or 10 bars on to get a picture across. And as a little aside, I used to have a company at that time called Precedence Management Services Limited, which I thought was quite a good name for a planning company. Unfortunately, my logo and my initials, PMS, got hijacked by some other things. So it didn't seem such a good acronym to have in the construction industry, so I had to set a new company up. Planning software, it carried on its life. The main key player of the day was Artemis. The development of this software probably had a pivotal change in the role of the planner and the actual job of planning. The initial investment in the licenses for Primavera was extortionate, I think. A company who were investing in planning software were really throwing some serious money at it. Once you'd paid for the software, you then had to pay even more for ongoing license agreements, which people didn't necessarily notice when they signed up to the software. And then again, afterwards, you had to train the people. The net result of buying this Primavera software was you had a mainframe computer with a black screen and a white asterisk flashing in the corner. That's what you got for your money. The asterisk in the corner, I don't know if there's any people who'd remember it, there were 3 levels. There was asterisk level, colon level, command level, and you had to write, I'm getting some nods over there, this, def, that, field. You were basically a code programmer. You had nothing. There was nothing built for you at all, and you had to go on these intense training courses to learn how to use the application. Had a little root around in the loft at the weekend and found some examples, if anyone wants to refresh their memory later, of some Artemis 9000 user guides, which have all those terms in there. So you're quite welcome to come over to the stand later on and have a look at those. And the best thing I managed to locate was the original Introduction to Artemis training course from around 1990. It even helpfully has a picture of a printer in case you hadn't encountered a printer previously in life. And it has got some green fan-fold paper in there with some notes from the training course. As a result of this development, I think the role of the planner was totally transformed. Originally, we were perceived as manual data entry clerks on a par with the draftsman. At the end of the training, if you stood the courses all the way through, you became a highly skilled technical developer of some specialised software. As with other software engineers, contracting was the norm, same as it used to be with the draftsman. The appetite for planning spread across the projects. and moved across into new industries, not just the defence, the oil and gas, into other manufacturing and construction industries. The role of the planner was elevated and began to be better respected and appreciated on the project teams. And the best bit was the rates were really good. Artemis carried on its evolution. It went through Artemis 5000, 7000, 9000. Some people built some bespoke front-end software for it, which was brilliant. No one was reinventing the wheel every time. And there were standardised front-end tools to help you use the Artemis database as well. Some other software packages came along as well, and eventually the software itself migrated over onto personal computers. With Artemis, it was Artemis PC, followed by Artemis 2000, which was actually an out-of-the-box front end. Great.